Hello, everybody. I'm Casey Havekes, one of the dairy management specialists with Cornell Cooperative Extension's North Country Regional Ag Team. Today, I am joined by Reagan Bluel, who is a dairy specialist with the University of Missouri Extension team. Today, we're going to discuss the topic of heat stress, which may have not been on your mind yet given the cold month that we've had, but surely moving into the summer months, it's going to be important to talk about and think about. So I'm very happy to have Reagan here with me today. And Reagan, why don't you start by giving us a little bit of background info on who you are and your role with the Missouri Extension team?
Absolutely. Well, as she was saying, my name's Reagan Bluel, and I've been with the University of Missouri Extension for about 6 years or so. And I love working with dairy farmers and helping bring to the forefront of their mind topics that can help them get through. And so I'm happy to talk about heat stress today. I think it's a very timely topic in May because we all know that heat stress really starts to kick off in June and July. And so by thinking about it right now while you're planting perhaps, then you can be on track to getting everything in order in time for the heat to hit.
Yeah, you make a really good point that now is the right time to start thinking about it. And I think often producers in my area and potentially your area maybe don't focus on it too much if they're thinking maybe, it doesn't get quite as hot here as it does in California and Florida. Are you able to give a little bit of context as to why we should care about heat stress in our environments?
Oh, absolutely. Well, in the last, say, 10 years or so, there's been so many published articles in the Journal of Dairy Science about heat stress in the dairy industry. And a lot of the works come out of Florida predominantly. And I truly recognize, guys, that New York is very far away from Florida. However, some of the fundamental physiology with the dairy cow doesn't change. And if you are breeding a genetically superior animal, she is in herself a little oven, right? If you think about her engine that's converting the nutrients that you're feeding her into fuel, and that fuel is going into milk, the genetics that you have put into her makes her a little more vulnerable to these heat stress weeks. And so I think we've all thought and looked at those graphs, the colorful graphs of temperature and humidity, and compared or combined those two numbers to get your THI, or your temperature humidity index number. And we used to look at the THI and really think that the dairy cow was able to handle the heat and humidity up until a combination of, say, 70 to 72. But with the genetic progress that we've made with this beast, we're really starting to notch that back to maybe even 68. And so she's starting to feel some substantial heat stress long before you really realize it. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the daily dairy. And if it's 65 or 70 degrees outside, you're thinking to yourself, it's a gorgeous spring day, when in fact, that's the early stages of a possible heat stress for your herd. And so we really need to have this in the forefront of our mind as we're going into the latter parts of spring and early parts of summer to be effective.
Yeah, so you bring up an excellent point of that temperature humidity index. So at that value of 68, what type of symptoms can farms start to look for in their cows?
Yeah, and I think this is really tricky because let's be honest, especially those herds that don't have as many hired hands, that are choring, and then midday you're going out and doing field work, and then you're choring again. A lot of times during the heat of the day, you might be out there harvesting your hay and not even seeing your cows exhibit the symptoms of heat stress. And so a lot of times that can look like, of course, sweating, but a lot of times you're going to see increased respiration rate. And in poorly ventilated barns, I think the numero uno indicator is you start to see cows crowding together, bunching together. And that often shows you that maybe your barn has certain spots that have better airflow, and the cows are going to attempt to get to that airflow, which is going to be counterproductive because as they accumulate together, then you've got this big mass or wad of heat. But you've got to be astute to it. And depending on if you're around midday to see that happen, got to be open to seeing it, I guess.
And so if a farm does see symptoms of heat stress and they do see that these cows bunching together or having increased respiration rate, what are some approaches to heat stress abatement, and what are some technologies that the farms could implement to try to minimize the effects of heat stress on these cows?
Well, I think I'm super sensitive to where we are right now in our economies. And I feel like right now we can be doing a variety of different strategies to prepare ourselves for heat stress. As far as maintaining the existing fans that you have, let's make sure that your fans have appropriate ball bearings, and if you have a stock of ball bearings available so that if one goes out, you'll be able to change it really quickly. Same with belts. Actually cleaning off your fan costs you nothing, but can have a huge impact on the efficiency of that basket fan that you're wanting to move air through your barn. There's different grouping strategies. One heat stress area that a lot of folks don't think about is your holding pen. And that holding pen with an increased density of cattle could and should be your priority to change. And perhaps that looks like adding sprinklers in your holding pen, or making sure that your holding pen has shade over it. So shade, sprinklers, and then even fans. And you can put 32-inch fans every 15 to 20 foot and 10 foot side by side to make sure you get that velocity of air over the high density of animals. But another solution simply is breaking your cows into groups so that they don't spend much time in that very hot area, minimize their exposure to that hot space. And I know sometimes nobody really wants to hear anybody saying, make more groups, because I recognize that makes chore time a little more difficult, but it could definitely impact your ability to manage heat stress there in the holding pen, and also maybe allow you to customize how you're feeding the animals. If they're grouped different, then maybe our early lactation animals, we can give them a little more fat in their diet because we expect their intake to go off. And so they'll still get their energy per bite. And so there's more strategies that you can do if you're willing to create multiple groups within your whole herd.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like a win-win there.
I really like amending the holding pen. And those sprinklers, a lot of times you can pick them up from your local hardware store for virtually nothing. And they're all stocked right now because even gardeners use similar black plastic tubing. It doesn't have to be the high dollar sprinkler system to have a high impact. Now, you'll probably have a longer lasting system if you go with a higher dollar one, but just to get some relief during these low milk prices, I'm certainly not opposed to utilizing that thin black plastic tubing with affordable spray nozzles at, half circle spray nozzles to spray down on the cattle. I also love having those sprinklers over the feed alleys too, but just make sure you have enough space in your lagoon, because those sprinklers can really add volume pretty quick. Maybe I was reading up on this, 0.35 gallons per cycle per position. So pretty quickly, you're going to run through some water there.
Yeah, that's pretty substantial. And that's a really good point about just getting some of the simple tubing, like what a gardener would use. That's a really excellent strategy given the current economic situation.
Yeah, for a matter of $100, you can get your average holding pen up and going for sprinkling. It's great.
Yeah, that's excellent. So Reagan, some of the farms out here are organic and they turn their cows out to pasture for a good part of the day and some of the night. So do you have any recommendations for what those pasture cows could do in terms of heat abatement?
Absolutely. And, especially during the spring into the summer, on those open nights, that's the best opportunity for those cows to dissipate heat. And so having them bedded outside overnight is a good time to release the heat units that they've absorbed throughout the day. And so I definitely promote that idea. And we just always hope that there's no cloud cover overnight, because that night is really impactful in their ability to withstand the enduring heat throughout the summer. But down here, we have a few grazers that are truly seasonal. And so they've integrated in a irrigation line to water their perennial ryegrass. And we know that perennial ryegrass doesn't like heat very much. And so the irrigation line helps kind of cool the air around the grass, but also they've changed the nozzles on their irrigation line and backed off the pressure. So they actually soak or sprinkle the cattle in the paddock while they're watering the grass. And so it's really kind of an interesting system. So if you have any producers out there with irrigation pivots that they're using in a pasture-based system, it can be a really neat opportunity to cool the cattle, get high vegetative perennial ryegrass to grow during the super high temperatures of the summer. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's a really cool strategy and dual purpose, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it takes a lot of management. You got to be very thoughtful as far as where the irrigation line is going to be and pivoting it such a way that the cattle are going to be under it during the heat of the day. But they definitely see an impact on grazing behavior throughout the heat of the day. The cows will be right there underneath the nozzles, marching right along through the paddock, and it's really neat to see. And I'll get you a picture that maybe you could include on your YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess another one of the strategies that farms are implementing here to try to cut down on production is to dry cows off earlier. And with that, I think we're going to see an increase of dry cows out on pasture. So this is obviously going to increase the risk of those dry cows experiencing heat stress. And I know heat stress on dry cows and calves has received a lot of attention in the past couple of years. So are you able to touch on any of that research and any of those considerations?
Oh, wow. So Florida has had some really impactful data that's been released in the last couple of years. One looking at the dry cow, and then the other one and the economics of providing heat stress relief to that dry cow. But then the other one was actually looking at the calf inside of the dry cow and seeing what heat stress while in utero, what that little calf, what's the impact of heat stress on the calf that's inside of the dry cow. And they found some really profound information. So they tracked those baby cows coming out of cows that were heat stressed. And this is a group of animals for over 5 different summers in the state of Florida. And when I say heat stress, guys, they still have shade, right? So they have access to shade. But when I say cooled dry cows, they have access not only to the shade, but also to fans and sprinklers, right? Otherwise, there's no difference between these dry cows. They're going to be second or greater parity, 5 different summers, so it's across many different data points. And what they did was they looked at these animals. And so first, the dry cow, as she freshens, all of the data suggests that she loses productive material, right, in her mammary gland and her immune system. And that's been well documented. We know that dry cow that's experienced heat stress will consistently produce about 11 less pounds per cow per day for that lactation, right? So we lose mama's milk. But then we take that heifer calf after it's born, and they tracked all of these heifers for 2 years. And they looked at what she did. It was actually for 3 years, because not only did they track her as a heifer calf, but then they calved her in and tracked the entire first lactation and looked at the productive potential of that first calf heifer. And really, it was amazing. There's one particular graph in the Journal of Dairy Science back in 2016, and you can see the very first week, they're almost about the same if they came from a heat stress dam or a cooled dam. But then after that second week, those calves, the heifer calves that were in utero from a heat stress dam, the ones that were cooled just pop right up, and then they run parallel the entire lactation. So the entire time, those that had dams that were cool consistently produced more milk and consistently persisted in the herd, and they were all treated the same as heifers. So They were housed completely the same. The only difference was that she was in utero and her mama was cooled or not cooled. It's really incredible to think about the phenotypic change. And so we've got a little bit of genetic change that might have occurred while she was in utero that programmed her to behave differently. And it's really incredible to think about how that has persisted through 3 years of production. It's
that's amazing. So it sounds too like not just from a welfare perspective, but on, when you think about the future performance of your herd, providing heat stress abatement to your dry cows, it sounds like it's a very obvious economic decision to make.
Without a doubt. And on a completely different paper, looking at New York specifically, they said on average, on the dry cow, so the mama, not the heifers, consistently produced about 900 less pounds the following lactation. So if that dam was heat stressed during her dry period, she's going to produce 900 less pounds right off of her rolling herd average, right off of her production potential, just because she was heat stressed during the dry period. Because that dry period is so important for mammary involution and preparation for the subsequent lactation, coupled with her immune system and making sure that immune system is robust and prepared for lactation. It's pretty profound. And so even in New York, where you don't necessarily always think about heat stress as much, you still have an impact that's documented at 900 pounds per cow on average.
Yeah, that's quite substantial when you think about, the productivity and the success of your overall herd.
And so also out of Florida, the next paper in August, August 2016, they published some economics of cooling these dry cows, because we're thinking to ourselves, I can hear you now, man, I just can't imagine putting right now milk, we're not getting paid very much, right? And so you're telling me you want me to spend money on my dry cows, and I know that can sound frustrating. However, it's a huge investment, because when this paper was showing that nationwide, on average, there's about 96 heat stress days. And so days that are over that THI of 68, right? So hot days, 3 months of the year on average for the nation, right? And what they were able to do was they looked at the cost of installing sprinklers and cooling systems, and they were able to find, specifically zooming in on New York, looking at your NOAA data, so your National Oceanic Atmospheric NOAA data. They looked at that NOAA data over time and extrapolated out that on average, your heat stress cost you per cow $75 per year, right? And so if you start to look at that reduced profit and the margins associated with that and the cost of putting in these systems, it really pays fast, right? Within a matter of 3 years, you can pay for a system pretty quickly, just in improved health impacts of the cows, and mostly through that improved milk production that you're gonna see.
So Reagan, you mentioned that those heat stress dams could experience a 900-pound increase in their next lactation, which is quite substantial in any given year. But given the current challenges that some of our New York farmers are facing with the need to decrease production, can you speak on the other important needs of that cow in terms of cooling her? Like, why else would it be important rather than just to improve production?
Absolutely, yes. And I know these circumstances are quite unique, right? And I recognize and can empathize with where New York farmers are right now. And so I recognize what you're saying, but at some point, we want to also make sure that the herd that we're retaining are likely going to be your genetically superior seed stock for your herd, right? And we want to make sure every single animal that you're carrying through this epidemic is going to be successful in her subsequent lactation. And so that means that we want her to propel through the transition period. And by cooling your dry cow, what you're doing is you're preparing her immune system also. And by equipping her immune system for success through the transition into that subsequent lactation. So you're making a more robust cow. And if you're kind of consolidating your herd anyway, these are the girls that matter to you. These are the girls that you want to succeed through that subsequent lactation, because this pandemic will pass and these consumers will want your milk soon. And we got to make sure that what cows we are retaining we're doing everything in our power to make them successful in the subsequent lactation. And I think also what you do in the dry period has lasting implications. And so we also know that those cooled dams are more likely to breed back, right? They're going to require 2.5 services to get bred if they're heat stressed versus only 2 services. And so you also have reduced cost of production in that healthier animal succeeding through transition with less inputs because metabolically she's not being challenged. It's going to make your world easier with just a little bit of input on the dry side.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and I appreciate you touching on that. It's definitely important to recognize that, like you said, this pandemic isn't going to last forever, and hopefully sooner than later we do start to see that the demand comes back up, and making sure that these cows are healthy is a really, really good strategy for the future of your herd.
Absolutely, and don't forget that dry cow has a heifer calf inside of her that you're trying to protect for 3 years from now. Yeah, and that's an investment that you're making in your herd.
Absolutely. So just before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I guess in conclusion, Casey, number one, I just really appreciate you calling me and having me on your YouTube channel. And I just want to emphasize to New York dairymen that heat stress is around the corner. And I know you guys are thinking about it, and I think you can make modest changes that are not very costly that will have huge impacts on your herd. And consider talking to an engineer with your local extension team to maybe design different placements of affordable fans in your dry pen to have that lasting impact, not only on the dam that's going to come fresh in the immediate, but also by preparing that baby calf, that baby heifer that she's carrying, you can have an impact on her also. And so just stay strong in this, and I hope that we have a nice, cool summer coming up.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Reagan, for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat with you and get your experience and your expertise on this topic area. So we really appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you for having me.
So Northern New York listeners, if you require assistance with heat stress abatement and ventilation, please reach out to either myself or Lindsay. We're happy to help. And then listeners in other parts of the state or other states, you have excellent extension resources, so please reach out to them if you require assistance with that. And thank you for listening, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.